This is Gene Montrose-Tilling. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 461, originally aired May 28th, 2014, re-edited and remastered for June 1st, 2020. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today, I'm going to share a conversation about how we use tapping in response to true catastrophe. And we're going to draw some parallels to what's going on in the world today. Before we do that, just a quick reminder, we have a free 10-part guide that you can use tapping to eliminate self-sabotage and take the action that you want. There are videos, there's audios, there's tapping scripts, there's instructions, and it is doled out a little bit every single day. Oftentimes when we get a lot of information, we have all these tools, and it's really difficult to implement them all by getting them all at once. And so instead, every single morning, you will get an email that just has a little 5-minute thing that you can do right there that is going to make it easier for you to clear your self-sabotage and take the action you want using tapping. And over the course of those 10 days, you're then going to be able to choose the 2 or 3 tools that are most useful for you, because not all of them might resonate with you, but you're now equipped with something that's really easy to use every single day. It will make you a better tapper, and it will make you more effective in taking whatever action that you want, be them personal or professional. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com, click on the big blue button. If you happen to be listening to this in the website, up in that upper right-hand corner, there's a big blue button. Click on that, and you will get the guide. So if you've been following along on the podcast, you've been knowing these Monday podcasts. I have been taking old podcasts from the archive that weren't full episodes, but used to be called bonus episodes, and I've been re-editing and resharing them. And the one that I am sharing today, as I was going through those bonus episodes, a number of them I just took out of the archive because they weren't useful anymore, or I've moved on and think of things in a different way, and I certainly wasn't going to repurpose them. This is one I thought really long and hard about, and then after I listened to it, it made perfect sense to share. So 6 years ago in May, I was lucky enough to be part of a group of 9 practitioners from all over the world who had the opportunity to go to the country Philippines to help in response to a major disaster. There was a typhoon that displaced 4 million people and damaged or destroyed 1 million homes. And we were there 6 months after the fact because of EFT practitioner Sebastian van der Sleur, who's Dutch, but spends a lot of time in Asia because he enjoys being there and his connections to that part of the world. And he just wanted to respond to what was going on. And it was truly a life-changing experience for me. And so after I had returned, I wanted to share the experience that I had, because a lot of people who were listening to the podcast and reading my stuff at the time had financially supported the work that we were doing there. And so I just wanted to give them a heads up and share what I had learned and what my experience was. And I wasn't exactly sure how to do that just as a first-person narrative. So I had my friend Helen McConnell, who is a practitioner in the Northwest of the United States, interview me about the experience. And so it created some structure to that conversation. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today. And even though this was 6 years ago, there are an amazing number of lessons about why we need to tap, how we share tapping with others, and how we share tapping with others in the face of crisis. And as the world is going through all that it is going through at this particular moment, I think this is going to be particularly helpful and insightful for you. I was actually surprised as I was re-listening to this and editing it, just the number of lessons that I've internalized that I don't actually name that were good reminders for me as well. This is my recollection. This is a week after being there that this was recorded. Memory is incomplete. Memory is inaccurate. Our memory is an interpretation of our experience. So I think I'm reporting this in this interview as accurately as I can remember it, knowing that I am a very poor eyewitness to my own experience, and it is as clear as it can be as I am sharing that. The second thing is, while I was there, I was actually journaling every single day. I think I wrote 14 or 15 different pieces over 10 days. That was kind of an in-the-moment experience. So if you'd like to see some of those details and see pictures of the places we were, and more importantly, the faces of the people we were lucky enough to serve, if you go into the show notes, you'll actually see a link to all of that writing. If you're on the website just above the player, you can actually see that. If you want to go to the website and click on it, if you go to tappingqna.com/461, which is this episode number, you will be able to access those writings as well as information about my friend Helen, who did this particular interview. One last thing, in a couple of different places in the interview, I share the stories of the people who experienced this, which involves some pretty traumatic things because there was a lot of really bad things that happened. In both of those cases, I mentioned them. If you are a little squeamish when you get to those points, you might want to click the 30-second jump forward button just so that you're not having to expose yourself to something that is traumatic that you don't need to be engaging with. So without further ado, here is my conversation from 6 years ago, right after I returned from doing the work in the Philippines.
Gene, I'm so happy to be able to interview you today about this experience that you had in the Philippines. Can you tell us a bit more about what a super typhoon really is? Because I don't think most of us can imagine the severity of it.
Right. So basically, when we're talking about a typhoon is the equivalent of a hurricane that is happening in the Pacific Ocean. So the atmospheric conditions are exactly the same. When they use the term super typhoon, basically in this case, it was a category 5 typhoon. Category 5 is the biggest one that we deal with. To put context of this particular storm in, this was a larger and stronger storm than Hurricane Katrina. And one of the things that kind of complicated it even more, that when it made landfall, it wasn't taking levees and tidal surges and rivers and pushing them into cities. It actually hit directly. So the top speed of this particular hurricane, and when they say top speed, it has to sustain it for a certain amount of time, or this typhoon, was 195 miles an hour.
Wow. I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, for this particular typhoon, it displaced more people than the tsunami in Japan and Hurricane Katrina combined. 4 million people were displaced. 1 million homes were damaged or destroyed.
Wow. And when you landed in the Philippines, what were your first impressions? What did you see?
So flying into Manila was just flying into a major international airport. They were a great distance away from it. So it wasn't until I got on the next connecting flight and actually got down to Tacloban City that I saw the impact of it. As we were taxiing in, the runway is basically right on the seashore. And so the first thing that I noticed as we were landing was the fact that it was basically tent cities everywhere. Between UNESCO and the UN and Red Cross, lots of the immediate response was giving people tents because their houses were gone. When we got to the airport itself, the airport was missing 2 of its 4 walls. It literally, wow. It looked more like what a really large picnic shelter in a park would look like than an airport.
Wow.
That, from where the runway is to the seating area for the people boarding the plane, it was open. Like there was no windows, there was no doors. Like it was just this big open side. The belt, which bags come out on, was basically destroyed. So it was just a platform that they wheeled things over. On departing, the only electricity I really saw at the airport was the electricity that was running a couple of lights, the electricity running fans because it was 90 degrees, and the electricity running the computers at check-in. There was no security electricity. That was all hand done. They used a megaphone to board the planes. And this is like 6 months later. I mean, it's basically, we were boarding major airplanes, huge jets, out of a band shelter in the middle of a field.
That's pretty profound.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And this was, I want to repeat, this was 6 months after the typhoon actually hit.
Yeah. So this was, November 7th to the end of May. So 6 months.
Wow. So how did your group organize?
How did our group organize? Very spur of the momently. So, and do you mean organize like how did we get there originally, or how did we organize once we were on the ground?
Well, you could tell both. I'm interested in both. I was particularly thinking about once you got on the ground, what did you do? How did you know where to go and who to treat?
So the only reason that any of this happened was because of the work that Sebastian had done. Sebastian spearheaded it, and his last, it's Dutch, it's Van der Schur, and I don't say it properly. That's as close as I can get.
Right. Yeah.
Seb is what we just called him. But Sebastian, because of his personal connection to the Philippines, he spends a good chunk of his year living in Asia. And so he basically, in a way to try and respond after giving money, wanted to do something else. So he just showed up and he just started making connections and going to village leaders and going to civic leaders and going to international organizations and walking into schools, literally talking to anybody and everybody saying, hey, I got this really cool thing. Let's see what we can do. In addition to that, he got linked up with a college professor who is from another part of the country who specializes in doing civil rights work. So she's really social justice oriented work to begin with. So Anna became invaluable in helping Sebastian to kind of navigate the cultural and political landscape, because he's just someone from the outside showing up to help. And that's great. And there is infrastructure that exists inside of that. So basically, Sebastian spent weeks ahead of our arrival making connections with as many people as possible. And so through those connections, just kind of created a list of places and let them know when we were showing up. The weekdays were spent going into barangays, going into different neighborhoods and working with whoever showed up. The weekends were spent in a much more formal way, training professionals, teachers, nurses, principals, psychologists, psychiatrists, folks who worked for the social work services of the city and the state. And so, he just basically just kind of cobbled it together. And it was one of those things that we just kind of said, when do we need to be in the lobby tomorrow? And we got in vans and we just kind of went.
And were you training all these people how to use tapping?
So it was kind of twofold. Okay. So the first thing that we did is we spent time just teaching them how to use it and doing actual work. We used as simple and direct of a teaching process as we could think of. It was basically tune into the issue, concentrate on the emotion, tap, just really straightforward. And so we typically spent the first chunk, if we had a full day there, it was the morning, just teaching them how to tap and spending lots of time working on their issues. It was, the number of people who, the wind, like I said, the wind was 195 miles an hour. And so, but that, that creates a sound as well as moves the world around you. I mean, literally peeling roofs off. And so the sound of the wind is something that still triggered lots of them to this day because it was so anchored inside of all of that. And so we would literally spend 30 minutes just tapping on the sound of the wind and all the aspects of the sound of the wind and things blowing on me and blowing rain and all of that. And so we would just spend time clearing as much as we could. The second chunk of the time, and this is out in the barangays, it was a little more formal when we were working with the professionals. We then taught them, okay, so how do you tap with a loved one? How do you teach them how to do this? And we taught them a really simple storytelling technique where they would sit, and culturally this was appropriate for folks to sit very close to each other, and they were very physically affectionate people. And we would have one person just start telling the story of the day, and the other person would be physically tapping on them. And as they were telling the story, we taught the person who was listening how to get good at stopping them when they were being triggered by an emotion. We would get to the triggered emotion, and then both of them would stop and they would do a round of tapping on the triggered emotion. And then they would take a few steps back. And it's just a really simple storytelling technique. It's nothing revolutionary, but it was something that was really simple and easy for them to be able to implement. And so most of our work in the barangays, that was it. It was just getting that far with them, getting them so they understood how to do it with themselves, getting it so they could share it with someone else in their life who was a loved one. And, only occasionally did we get the questions of how does this work and why do we do it in this order and why not these other points? Because they just simply wanted to feel better. And there wasn't a huge amount of resistance. They just were tired of dealing with what they were dealing with.
That's fantastic. So you didn't encounter a lot of cultural resistance or anything to this?
Well, I mean, it was the trainings that we offered weren't compensatory or compulsory, and so since they weren't compulsory, only the people who were interested showed up. So we had a group of people who were willing participants who were going to go. Now, one of the cultural things that we did need to get past was they are on the surface, a very happy people and a very joyous people. And, we would, at the beginning would ask the question, so who here, when you think of the wind, still gets scared? And 0 people would raise their hand. Like they didn't want to in any way be seen having these emotions and what's going on. But if we asked someone directly, or even, their friends volunteered them and pushed them up in front of the group, then they were very willing to dive in. And so we just had to learn initially how to navigate the very happy face that they were used to putting on and working really consciously to create a space or speaking in a way that drew the specific information out to allow them to tune in. Once we got there, getting them to tap and try was really easy. The other thing, and this is just true for teaching tapping to anyone, is we were always very, very conscious from the very beginning of saying, this looks really silly. And this is really hard to explain, and you're going to feel foolish doing it, and that's okay. We're doing it too. And by calling that out and getting people to laugh about that, normalized it and made it easier for them to engage as we did it.
Well, that's fantastic. And this may sound like kind of an ignorant question, but do most people in the Philippines in the areas where you were speak English?
So, sort of. There's a lot of English spoken. They were much more comfortable understanding English than speaking English. And I'll give you a perfect example. Whenever we were working with a group out in the barn, guys, we always worked with a translator. Just to make sure that we were getting things clear. But I was working with a group of 45 women one afternoon and had been with them a day or so and had a good rapport with them. And I was teaching them how to tap on positive things because we'd gotten through teaching them how to do negative things. And so in English, I said, I want you to tune into someone you really love. Okay, now I want you to think of someone you really love who isn't me. And all of them instantly laughed. Before we got to the translation, every single one of them laughed. So they understood exactly what I was saying. The time that it became more complicated for them was when the emotional vocabulary that they had in English was much more limited than the emotional vocabulary they had in their native language. And so they could communicate effectively in English, but I have 17 different ways to describe being happy. I have one word for that when I'm talking in Spanish. Just because my Spanish vocabulary is so limited, I can tell you I feel happy, but in English, I can give you nuance in so many fewer words than if I was trying to do it for you in Spanish. So the same was true with them. It was something that they were conversant in and could use easily and understood, but when it came time to doing work, oftentimes, and we gave them permission to do this, to do it in whatever dialect felt most comfortable for them. And almost without exception, they went to some form of what they were speaking locally and went away from English.
Excellent. But you had a translator there to help you out.
And so what we did was we had 2 folks, one Anna who was with us, another one King, who was this 23-year-old kid who we just picked up along the way because we just picked up people along the way. Who traveled with us. And then when we went into the barangays, the villages, the neighborhoods, one of the things that was always requested was to have a couple of people who would be willing to translate for us. And so the barangay captain or someone else in the neighborhood who was really, really good with English beyond just a conversational sense was always really willing to help us out. And they were delightful. The folks who translated for us were just great. I mean, they were so useful.
Oh, that's fantastic. And were you and the other tappers generally received well in all the areas where you went?
Well, I mean, think about it in this way. Okay. We have a group of people who have just been introduced as being experts who have traveled between 5 and 10,000 miles at their own expense to show up and be helpful. You know, you build a lot of rapport and credibility simply by walking in the room. And it's hard for me to get into the specifics because I don't know all of the specifics, but it's fair to say that the national political system inside of the Philippines is very complicated. And because of that, there were a number of people in the villages that we were in who felt very let down by the national government, not the local government, but by the national government. And in multiple occasions when they were thanking us, they were drawing a direct contrast between what we had done for them and what people close to them had not done for them.
Wow. So you were able to sidestep some of the political
we just showed
red
up
tape or whatever.
Yeah, and again, you know, we just showed up to be helpful. One of the allies that we had in the city that made things a lot easier was the vice mayor of the city. Was super on board with the work that we were doing. And on the weekends, at no charge, opened up his office for us and gave us the big conference room where they do civil meetings. And he showed up on the weekend to greet everyone, and did this multiple weekends for us. His wife came one of the days and did the full training. And so having someone like that certainly made it helpful because he was then able to turn to the government social work program and say, I have these trainers coming in, send your people. And so folks traveled from as far as 90 minutes away to come into the bigger city because the city government was sponsoring the training. So that was invaluable in the work that we were doing.
It sounds like an amazing experience. And I'm wondering if you can explain to people, just in case people don't really realize why tapping is such a great disaster relief tool, if you could just go into that just for a minute, like why is it important to go in and heal the trauma first?
So basically what happens is, you know, anytime we have something bad happen, a part of our brain remembers all of the elements around that bad happening so that when those elements show up again, we're able to keep ourselves safe. You know, if I'm in a circumstance where I have a really bad encounter with a dog, you know, when I hear dog barking in the future, that fear is going to be triggered off again because it wants me to go, oh, last time we heard dog barking, there was angry animal at our front. Okay. And so when we're in a traumatic circumstance, it takes all of the elements that we can remember from that traumatic circumstance, and it associates whatever bad things happen with that. And so, you know, it's so hard to do this without being super graphic. You know, when you're in a circumstance where you have an experience where you experience the wind and it blows the corrugated metal off of your roof, and that corrugated metal then goes and kills someone as it goes flying through the air. Now, it's very easy for your mind to associate wind with that sort of catastrophe. So every single time you encounter wind or the sound of wind, all of the fear comes rushing back from that really disastrous moment. Right. You know,
and I'm going to invite listeners to tap while they're listening if they're getting triggered by it. Yeah. You know, just tap on yourself. But
and same thing. You know, waves. You know, the water. The hotel we were at, which was one of the first hotels to reopen, had water damage on the 4th floor, not from the rain, from the flooding. On the 4th floor. And it was 9 blocks. 9 blocks? Yeah, about 9 blocks from the water's edge. So you now have this experience with waves. You know, the number of people over and over again that as they told the story was telling the story in like the marker in the story was how high the water was. The water was up to my ankle. The water was up to my chest. We were now in the rafters of our house. And so if you're in a circumstance where waves and water do that, well, when you live near the ocean, there are waves all of the time. There is winter breeze, or there's sea breeze all of the time. It rains regularly. And so when all of those things become anchors to take you back to this really horrific experience for you, you know, It's one thing if I have a traumatic experience with a tiger, because living here in Brooklyn, New York, I don't experience a lot of tigers.
Right.
So it's less likely to be triggered. Maybe watching the National Geographic Channel or going to the zoo. Wind, I experience wind all the time. Rain, yep, that happens regularly. And so that's why it becomes so vital, because they keep re-triggering and re-experiencing all of the fear and all of the sadness that goes along with that horror in their daily life, because the things associated with it are from their daily life.
And so as you clear this, the trauma of these things that go on in their daily life, and frees them up to actually regroup and reorganize and rebuild in maybe a more creative way. Isn't that true? It was
just a perfect example of this. So we are one of the barn guys we went to. We got 2 full days with them, and lots of people showed up, both sessions, both days. I mean, it was the most in-depth training we got the chance to do. And so we had tapped with them in lots of different forms and shapes. And so we're in the second afternoon, and I said, great, everybody take a nice deep breath. I want you to imagine the sound of wind, and I want you to tell me how triggered you feel right now. And you can just see them shrugging and smiling and go, 0. And like every single one of them. And it wasn't I'm putting on a happy face. It was a different response than that, where they were done with it. And so what it did was, now every single moment as they went forward, they didn't have the biochemical and the emotional response of fear that shows up every single time the wind blows, which puts them in a different resource state day to day in responding in their relationships, and in responding in the work they do, and in responding in their creativity. It just makes them in such a better resource state. Not to mention, we're not dealing with the physical consequences of feeling stressed and angry and overwhelmed, which we know can hurt the body. So we've taken care of both of those things.
That's fantastic. There's a great video that Sebastian posted of him working with a young woman, and it is so profoundly moving to see her. You can tell she's not just putting on a happy face. Her entire demeanor, everything about her changes in 20 minutes of tapping with him.
Over and over and over again. I can see those faces. I know the video you're talking about, and I can just see this catalog of faces flipping through in my head of this lightness that was just so apparent when we were done. Just amazing.
Is there any 1 or 2 particularly memorable experiences that you can share with us? Maybe.
Yeah. So 2 that come to mind immediately. One of the things that was really, really obvious was the people understood the magnitude of trauma inside of their own community. Like, everybody knew it was bad, and they knew who had it the worst. We ended up, just because of asking, and it's a story that I might tell in a moment, we ended up working with the entire staff of a college. And they literally just shut down their work day to work with us. And when we asked for a volunteer, they literally pushed a woman to the front of the room, her colleagues, because she had her mother die in her arms. So everybody knew, of what had happened, it was the worst. So we're out in one of the villages, and it's, typically when we were working with the adults, the kids, it was different. But when we were working with the adults, it was almost exclusively women, because most of the men were physically rebuilding their houses. And so we have this tent full of people, and there's 39 women and 1 man in the room. And so we break them up into pairs to start working. And as people approach the guy, he just kind of says no. Everybody has a partner but this guy. And so the woman who had been translating for us grabs me by the wrist, walks me over to him, sits me down in front of him, and says, he lost his wife and one of his kids. You are going to work with him. This wasn't a question. This wasn't a request. I was being told what was going to happen. And so I sit down with him, and I ask him, so do you speak English? And he kind of looked down and said, no. And just like that, another one of the women sits down, and she says, I will translate for you. So we spend 45 minutes tapping. And there are times where I'm guiding him along and he's tapping. There are other times where Olive, my angel, Olive, just starts working with him. and starts giving him reframes and is tapping with him and is caressing his face and is holding his hand and just does all of this work. And then she would then explain what she had just done in English. So I was caught up to speed, or I don't know, maybe she was looking for my approval. I don't know what it was, but she just, and so 45 minutes later, that's where he was. That lightness was there. There was a smile there. There was a gentleness that was there. And to see the connection and understanding of who needed help was awe-inspiring, because they very easily could have said, I'm in trouble, go to me first. The ability for this woman to just rush in and be helpful because she recognized the only way this was going to work, her ability to have had picked up the protocol so quickly after our morning training session that in the afternoon she could tap with this guy effectively without my guidance at all was absolutely amazing. And it turned out she didn't know him. She knew his wife, that they had been friends, but she didn't know him. And she just this was just what needed to be done. So that was one experience that will stick with me. The other one was one of the places I had 30, 10, 11, and 12-year-olds. And I had a translator who was not super confident. Like, she did great with the translation, but she wasn't super great standing in front of a group of kids trying to marshal them to do anything. And I just recognized that doing something in a large group was going to be really hard. And so we gave the kids instructions, because we were at a school in the classroom, to just draw a picture of the storm. Well, first we had them draw pictures of their family. And then I had them draw pictures of the storm and what their experience was like with the storm. And we did that in the morning. In the afternoon, I sat with the kids and one by one had them tell me the story of the picture and everyone that was in it and what they felt. And I have them. I took all of them home with me. I have these pictures. And I mean, sensitive listeners turn away. It was floating bodies, and it was severed body parts, and it was a family in the house with a giant X through the house, and water going all the way to the top of the page, and family pictures of kids in rafters and dad holding door and someone praying. And I mean, just stunning. I mean, just stunning stories. One after another, and to just sit with them and basically just spent 2.5 hours in the afternoon, just having them tell stories of pictures and tapping and tell stories of pictures and tapping, was just, I don't know how that will ever not be in the front of my brain. I'm sure at some point things fade back.
I'm getting chicken skin just listening and thinking about it. Yeah.
So it was a pretty amazing moment to be a part of, and to be in a circumstance that, temporary relief is awesome. And if we were in a circumstance where we provided some long-term relief, we're talking about the ability to be impacting multiple choices for decades to come. It's not just because we know, particularly those who work with clients, we know how profoundly non-traumatic things from our childhood can be perceived as a child as traumatic, and how much they can impact the choices we make as adults. To have an opportunity to clean some of that up, not even all of it, but to clean some of it up before it has the opportunity to take root and fester for 2 decades and impact them when they're in their 20s and 30s, is pretty amazing.
Yeah. I was thinking of, as you were talking about working with the man who lost his wife and one of his children, how amazing this tapping will be so that he can be with his surviving children instead of being absent for his surviving children.
Absolutely.
And that is profound.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This is fantastic. I mean, very sad, but very hopeful in the same way. So do you think that, how many residents or people do you think you and your group worked with over the course of, it was a week or 10 days?
Okay,
right?
so it was actually 21 days, but most of the...
I didn't realize it was that long.
But most folks didn't have 21 days to give. We were in a circumstance, the day that Sue, Emma, and myself arrived, the plane that we got off of, Ruhana, David, and Steve got on because they were just finishing their time. And Tanya Prince had flown out the day before. So there's actually an overlap of a number of us who had come from the outside. I don't know what their experience was. Our experience over the 9 days I was there, the weekend trainings that we did, we had between 35 and 45 people each day, and they were 1-day trainings. So they were unique groups. During the day when we went into the bar and guys, we saw between 75 and 400 people, depending on the bar and guy that we went to. I mean, one of the places we went, there were 125 children who showed up. And that wasn't any of the adults at all. And that was, and again, part of it was because of, we were dependent upon local organization, and the bar and guy captain in that particular place, she was awesome. Like, she had mobilized her people for something that she knew would be really valuable for them, or hopes that would be really valuable for them. And it made a real difference because, we were just at their whims. And when we showed up, it was so funny. I was talking to a friend before I left, and I said, we have a plan that's not going to work because we have no idea what we're walking into. The plan is useful because it's going to frame it and help us to be organized, but we don't know what we're going to find. And so literally every single place we showed up, we had an idea of how many people, how many translators, what the space would look like, and it was accurate to a degree. We would then get there and we'd go, great. Okay, so how many people do we have, children and adults? How many spaces do we gather in that are actually in the shade? How many translators do we have? And we would just huddle and go, I think this is what we can do and manage here. Great, go. And off we went. The thing that was very impressive was the amazing lack of ego that I encountered with the folks who were there doing the work, that everybody was just willing to do whatever they needed to do to be helpful, even if it wasn't something that was their strength, or even if it wasn't the most high impact of all of the things that could be being done, or even if it was possibly a squandering of resource and training. It was just this is what we're in the middle of. As the team of us, how do we best serve this community? And everybody was able to just put their desires, agendas aside, which was so impressive and so heartwarming to know that that would be the circumstance.
It sounds, the whole experience sounds like it was heart-based and intentional, and things just moved in amazing ways to make it happen.
Yeah.
That's how it sounded from the first time I ever heard about it.
Absolutely. And it was, again, if none of this would have existed if it wasn't for Sebastian's heart and passion, and tireless work, because we would come back and we would be exhausted, and he would be spending another 2 or 3 hours working on making more connections and working out the details for the next day, and working on refining the manual that we were giving to the local professionals, and, worked so much harder than the rest of us, that it just, I contributed very little in comparison to the amount of work and effort and heart and just, fearlessness that he demonstrated in trying to help people that he really felt connected to and loved.
And that is a word that seems to be a theme throughout this, is fearlessness, courage, to just go and do what needs to be done. And we tend to resist doing that out of fear.
So here's a perfect example. So Monday evening, Sebastian goes and he plays soccer, plays football with the local guys, just to play some football for no other reason than to do that. After the game, he's explaining to them why he's there and what he's about, because he's this Dutch kid in the middle of all these Filipinos. And he says, well, if any of you guys want to learn, tomorrow night, come back to the stadium. We'll just sit in the stands and we'll do some tapping. And so it looked like 5 of them were going to come back. So after dinner, all of us wander over to the stadium just to be helpful and just to see what's going on. And 2 of the 5 guys show up. So we're in the stands with these 2 guys. So Sebastian just goes over to this group of high school kids and says, this is what we're doing. Do you want to come learn? And just by force of will and charm, all of a sudden we now have 5 high school kids sitting with us and these 2 men. And so Sebastian runs a quick little mini demonstration, teaches them how to do it, and we then break into small groups. And Tom takes a group of the kids, and I take a group of the kids, and Sue and Em are working with the adults. And we just do some stuff, and it was great. It was really, really awesome. It was a lot of fun. The 2 high school kids I worked with went from worrying about rain to worrying about their college entrance exams.
Fantastic.
Which was great.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. I mean, they were just a delight. So then one of the 2 men who had showed up says, you know what, the people at my former workplace need this as well. Well, he had been one of the instructors at a maritime institute that taught sailors, a college. And so he calls over, and Wednesday afternoon, we show up at 3:00 in the afternoon, and with the exception of the administration staff, everybody from the university piles into the conference room. The director of the school gives us a very formal, proper welcome and thanks us, and then sits down with the group, and we spend 2 hours tapping with the staff.
Wow.
And, and most of this isn't equipping them to go teach it. This is mostly just helping them with everything they've experienced, And so
right. I
got to spend, way more than 90 minutes with a group of 6 people. And we did some group stuff and taught them how to do it together. And, and it was simply because of a fearless ask. Ask some guys at a soccer field if they wanted to tap. Ask some high school kids in a stadium if they wanted to tap. And so of those 2 men, so one of them gets us into the school. The other one becomes our translator for the rest of the time. He's between classes. And so he just shows up to the hotel every single morning, and he just travels with us every single day. Someone we did not know.
And that's because he experienced some profound relief.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This was so easy and so powerful.
Yeah. And so he just knew that it would be useful and helpful. And he brought one of his friends along one of the days. And I mean, And so that's what it was, because of Sebastian's willingness to just ask everyone with no sense of worry about whether or not they would say no, but just to ask, it just created the spirit of invitation everywhere we went, not just in his invitation.
That's fantastic. It's just beautiful. The ripple effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever you want to call it. We are all connected, and this is a beautiful experience. And this may be difficult to express, but how do you think your life has been changed by this experience?
I have no idea. I mean, I've been back. What have I been back? 7, 11, 12 days. And so my mind's still a bit of a blender. Part of that's just, I was 12 hours in time change, it's 36 hours of straight travel. And so just getting myself turned back around physically. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I've had the opportunity to be doing work in the developing world and to do work in real traumatic circumstances before. So many of the kind of lessons of that sort of work are things I've had the chance to experience before. So it wasn't like I had never experienced that. So it was the first time I'd been in the middle of trauma. Or, I spent 6 days in one of the shelters after Hurricane Katrina in Houma, Louisiana. So I've even seen this type of destruction firsthand before.
Wow.
So, it's a reinforcement and a recognition for the power of the work and how important it is to create lives that allow us to carve out, to basically shut my life down for almost 2 weeks between travel time and work there to do something like this and to recognize that that's something to continue to strive for. Personally, the thing I take most is, I knew very little of the Philippines. I have a number of friends who live in the Pacific Northwest of the United States and Southwest of Canada, and there's huge Filipino communities there. So I have many Canadian Filipino friends and American Filipino friends, and had a sense of it, but just did not know the Philippines and did not know the Filipino people. And they were just, oh my gosh, so wonderful. So wonderful. So wonderful. They were so lovely. And so
compassionate and caring.
And they just a light and a grace to them, even in the midst of all that they had done. I mean, they just basically were to the point where they were just getting on the flight. The town we were in, which was the major city for the area, 6 months out, still did not have traffic lights. And so people just drove into intersections and just kind of scooted their way through intersections, and everybody just kind of gave way for everybody else. And there are buses and jeeps and cars and motorcycles and bikes, and everybody just kind of knits their way through the intersection, and you move on. And it's just the way that it is. And it's a third of the things on every menu we sat down for was not available for one reason or another. And and people are just like, and this is what we have and this is what we're doing. And it was, not a huge set of fret and not a huge set of worry, and folks' ability to just navigate all of that with grace, just recognizing this is far from perfect. We're not going to stay static where we are, and we're going to accept it for what it is and respond the best that we can. That was just a delight.
So people are generally pretty resilient.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And it sounds like the Filipinos are particularly resilient, and you've given them
people are resilient.
An added layer of resiliency.
Yeah, and I think that's just it. I mean, we were when we were one afternoon, we got to visit a spot in town in which 3 shipping vessels, 3 boats had literally been dropped into a neighborhood. And these are boats that are 150 feet long. And people literally had just rebuilt their houses on the spot around the boats that'll eventually get cut out. And I ended up playing with a group of 8 kids who were just playing like, 9-year-old kids. And they just happened to be playing in the shadow of this boat. And one of the tools they had to play as part of their playground was this propeller on the boat that was 9 feet tall. And, and they just were kids. And if you recorded their sound, if you isolated just them and you were able to wash out the background, it would be kids playing anywhere in the world. And so it just was, I mean, it was just life was continuing as it could. And it was just impressive to see.
Well, this is just a beautiful story, Gene. I really appreciate it. And I have thought often that tapping should be a part of disaster preparedness plans.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it is, it's a useful tool for anyone to be able to respond. One of the things that, that I've recognized from getting the opportunity to do crisis response stuff in this informal way, and then in a formal setting where I had an opportunity for a number of years to do it inside of a school system, is that it's great that we equip the people who are in the middle of the trauma, but no matter where they are inside of the trauma, they're being traumatized as well. I've had the opportunity to go into schools in which, a teacher had committed suicide. Well, the faculty was just as traumatized by that as the kids. Now, the faculty was holding a stiff upper lip, but they weren't in a circumstance or a capacity to be able to respond in a really effective way to do care. And that's the reason why we were coming in, is because we were outside of the circumstance and we had special training in that. And so it's a great tool for everyone to have. I think it is, as in some capacities, a more valuable tool for the folks who are responding to trauma than the folks who are traumatized, because the folks who are traumatized are in such a resource poor state. The ability to reach for any resource is something that's going to be difficult to do. And it takes the folks around them that they are following the direction of, that it's the most useful to have it in their hands.
Okay, so teams that come in after a disaster, you're saying, would probably be more effective than locals who are trained in this.
Absolutely. And again, that's a guess just based off of my experience, but that's just part of the reality of, when we are, I know in my own life, when I am at my resourced poorest state, I am most likely to make the most emotional choice.
Right. And it doesn't always involve reminding yourself to tap.
No, it more than likely involves cookie and cream, ice cream, and bourbon. And that's just the reality of me and my life and the way I deal with super, super stress.
Right. Well, we just like to think that, I believe that it's true that the more we tap, the less often those things occur.
Absolutely. And the more we tap, the less resource it takes to reach for, because it's our habitual response. So even when we are in a resource poor state, it's something we can reach for. But when we're talking about large scale trauma, most people have so little experience with that. I mean, things are traumatic because they are unexpected, they are extreme, and they are isolating. I read a study around one of the most recent set of bombings that happened in the tube system, the underground system in London. And as they were kind of doing an analysis of all the people that were in the trains, and they were trying to figure out who was traumatized and suffered from PTSD and who didn't, one of the most significant questions they could ask that was going to determine whether or not someone had experienced that sort of trauma was whether or not after the experience, they were able to connect with someone via text message or cell phone. And it didn't matter that they were surrounded by people because they didn't know those people and it was an isolating sense. But if they were able to get through to someone else on the outside and just get some sort of reassurance that they were okay, then the event no longer became isolating. So it was much less likely to have a long-term traumatic impact on them. And so when we experience something really, really big, it's natural for it to feel isolating because we feel in over our head. And when we feel in over, at least me, when I'm in over my head, I'm much more likely to turn inward than I am to turn outward because subconsciously I don't like the world seeing me in over my head. And so
very vulnerable place to be, right?
Yeah. So it magnifies the isolating nature of whatever major trauma I'm experiencing. And so so hoping folks to reach for the most useful resources in the moment who are in the middle of it is a great thing, and it's good to equip people to do that. And it's a hard ask. I hope you found that conversation useful and enlightening. It was really good for me to revisit it, that I actually learned a great number of things or was re-reminded of a great number of things that I learned from that particular experience. I hope you found that useful as well. A big thank you to Helen, who took so much time to thoughtfully have the conversation with me. I can remember her bringing it up and saying, hey, can I interview you about this so that we can share the story? And it was just wonderful that she was willing to do exactly that. If you know someone who might find this conversation useful, please pass it along. Don't spam your inbox, because this is certainly a very, very particular interview that even the people in your life who are interested in tapping might not be interested in this. But if there's one or two people who you can think of who might find this conversation useful, please pass it along. It would mean the world to me, and it would be wonderful if they had the opportunity to have a little transformation from this particular conversation as well. If you haven't done so, make sure you check out the entire podcast archive. If you go to tappingpodcast.com, there are over 460 audios, instructions like this, interviews with amazing change work professionals, tap along audios and scripts just waiting for you. Tappingpodcast.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show. Remembering in podcasting parlance, subscribe is always free. It's not like Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus where you're having to pay a monthly fee. Subscribe simply means every single time a new episode comes out, it will be delivered to you. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, literally everywhere you find audio, you can find the show. Just search Tapping Q&A, click subscribe, click follow, click whatever the button is in that ecosystem so that every single week when new episodes come out, you can take advantage of them. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have topics you would like us to cover in the future, please reach out. I can always be reached directly at Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. If you're on the website, click on that contact link. If you are inside of the free Tapping Q&A app, click on the contact link. You can send me an email or you can send me a voicemail from right inside of the app. If you haven't downloaded the app, you should probably do that as well. There are over 460 audios in there. Every single audio that includes a tap along, we also have a printed script inside of the app. So you can just go to the text section, TEXT section, and you have access to the tapping scripts without even having to listen to the audio. So if there's something you want to tap on in the moment, you can just pull it up and tap right along. In the iOS App Store, in the Android App Store, just search Tapping Q&A. It is absolutely free. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrastelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrastelli Tapping Q&A. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrastelli and Tapping Q&A.